Part 2, the Featning. Yeah, I'll go with that. All right, so Magus Feats. The Magus, when it comes to feats, there isn't anything I would say is super required, barring certain hybrid study related feats. The Magus is a very, very pliable class because you get so much out of Spell Strike and your hybrid study, and then you're given basically everything you need in your kit as you level up. That feats are just there to enable you to kind of do additional things, but there's nothing that's a numeric increase in your feats that big, with the exception of a couple. So with the Magus, it's a very easy class to multi-class with, and there aren't, like I said, that many required feats. There's a lot that adds flavor in, and a lot that adds utility in. So yeah, we can just start into them then. With that little caveat note there. So out of the gate, we have Arcane Fists. Your fists are a D6 instead of D4. You don't take a -2 circumstance penalty for making a lethal attack. And your fists have the Arcane trait. At 5th level, you gain the effects of the unarmed, or the brawling group of weapons. You get the critical specialization for it. Move a creature 5 feet, I think. So it's a fine little spell. Oh, by the way, Magus, you don't get a level 1 feat out of the gate. This is for humans with their natural ambition feat. As 4 options for that if you choose that feat. You can get a familiar, which is always handy. Really good option on the familiar is using it as a focus point battery, because you can get a focus point back from your familiar. I think it's once per day, right? That's really helpful for your conflux spells, which recharge your spell strike and have their own good effects. Your familiar won't be as powerful as a witch's, obviously. And if you multiclass to witch, you get a familiar anyways. But yeah, you just get a familiar. It's a standard spellcaster thing to have that as an option. Magus' Analysis, aside from being fun to say, you need to be able to spell strike with it. It's 1 action. So, yeah, attempt a check to recall knowledge about a creature. You gain a +1 circumstance bonus to your check if you've previously hit the creature with a strike this turn. If your check is successful, you recharge your spell strike. The subject of your check is temporarily immune to Magus' Analysis for 1 day. So this is just another option for you to recharge that spell strike while doing another thing. It's not necessary for the character, but it suits the Magus just fine because the Magus is, as I mentioned, kind of an intelligence kid. So you get this recall knowledge in combat thing when you've hit a creature. It's not a bad feat. Handy little utility to pick up. So raise a tome. You got to be holding a book to use it. Single action. You raise the book up, and you get a +2 circumstance bonus to AC, +1 circumstance bonus to recall knowledge to identify creatures using a skill related to the subject of the book. Like, say, Arcana. They give the example of Arcana if you're using your spell book. Don't use your spell book with this. Don't risk it. So if you have Shield Block, aka our Sparkling Targe Magus, and you use the Tome for that feat, the Tome's hardness is 3, its HP is 12, and its broken threshold is 6. You can also use this with Emergency Targe or Reactive Shield, etc., to raise a Tome in a reaction. It's a fun, flavorful feat. I remember seeing it in the playtest and thinking it was really cool, but I was also like, I don't think I'd ever use that, especially with my spell book, because I wouldn't want to risk my spell book. I think a real shield is the way to go, honestly. But if you want to have that flavor of a sword and a book Magus, Raise a Tome is a nice little flavorful thing to pick up. So 2nd level, we have Cantrip Expansion. Pretty much every caster gets this. 2 extra cantrips per day, which is not bad. And you can get a Enhanced Familiar if you picked up the Familiar. Expansive Spell Strike. Expansive Spell Strike might need its own section to be talked about. So what Expansive Spell Strike does is it lets you use any harmful spell with your Spell Strike. It has to be able to target a creature, and it has to have an area of burst, cone, or line. And there's a lot of caveats with this, and it gets really complicated sometimes. It could possibly be good, taking a cone of cold and still getting the cone out of it, is neat. Burning Hands, getting the cone out of Burning Hands is neat, while also striking. So this kind of lets you throw that strike into the actions of the spell, which is good in and of itself, because, the Magus' action economy is not the best, but being able to squish things into actions, more things into doing, the same number of actions is kind of a Magus thing, right? That's what the conflict spells are. So Expansive Spell Strike, though, is complicated. I almost want to go over spells with this in mind when we get to doing a spell section, because there's a lot that you can do with this, and it's pretty complicated. Just going over it right now, like this little block of text here. So if your strike critically fails, the spell is lost with no effect. If your strike fails, the spell still goes off, by the way. So there's a little bit of like protection in there over you just whiffing an attack, and then like the fireball going off. The fireball still goes off unless you critically fail. So creatures use their normal defenses against spell, such as saving throws, basically like normal spell strike. The spell lets you select a number of targets. It instead targets only the creature you attacked with your strike. So, can't think of a spell off the top of my head that says something like that. But basically, it condenses whatever that spell down is that isn't hitting an area specifically, that's targeting a number of creatures. It'll just condense it right down to hitting the one creature. If the spell has an area, the target must be in that area. A burst is centered on a corner of the target's square, or the square corner closest to the center of the target. The target is large or larger. You choose the corner if there is more than one eligible. A cone or line emits from you and must include the target. If you're not adjacent to the target, using a reach weapon or Starlight Span, for example, choose any square adjacent to the target as the source. The spell affects all creatures in the area as normal, but the strike still only hits one creature. So if you're doing Burning Hands with its cone effect, and your Starlight Span, say, you can fire that arrow or bullet or whatever off, arc it over, and it hits the target, and then that square in front of the target, boom, that's your Burning Hands. Actually, what's funny is it doesn't actually say it has to be in line with that arrow. So if you Starlight Span, I think you can Starlight Span, hit the Burning Hands, and like have the cone come backwards. Because it's any square adjacent to the target as the source, which is kind of neat. So yeah, it's a lot to figure out sometimes, but it's still really handy for getting the most out of your spell casting. If you multi-class to another caster and pick up their spell slots, or if you intend to use a lot of stabs, I'm not saying it's a twisting tree, just in general if you're going to use stabs, Expansive Spell Strike is going to be very handy in getting the most out of that other class's spell casting and out of staff spell casting. Because you can actually do spell strikes from your staff. It's just there are caveats to it with how you hold it and how you do the spell strike and which hybrid studies are best at doing that. So Expansive Spell Strike, though, not necessary. It's handy. It expands what you can do with your spells as a spell strike. It is not necessary for you to pick up. It is an option. Like I said at the start of the Feats stuff, it's all pretty much optional with one or two exceptions based on hybrid study from here on out. I think there's definitely places to pick it up where you would consider it more necessary, but it's not as much as you would think. So, Force Fang, you need a focus pool to pick it up. You can turn your attack into an unerring blur of force. You learn the Force Fang Conflux spell, and you increase your focus points by 1. So, Force Fang is sort of a melee magic missile. For 1 action, you deal a d4 of force. Your weapon turns into a force weapon, and you don't miss. It's just a d4 plus 1 of force damage. I believe it scales a little... No, I think it does actually do per level scaling. But we will look at the details of all of the conflict spells in the feats when we get to the actual spells section. Force Fang is not bad. It's a good finisher. It can deal damage to things weak to force and incorporeal things like ghosts. And it recharges your spell strike. So you can get damage and get that spell strike recharge. All told, not terrible, actually. It's not a lot of damage, though. You got to keep that in mind. But it doesn't miss. Like I said, melee magic missile. Spell Parry. 1 action. You have to have 1 or more hands free. I didn't even mention this. Laughing Shadow, say, with Arcane Fists, I think that's probably your best bet for that. You can do it with Sparkling Targe, maybe Twisting Tree. But Arcane Fists, it's much... Like, you obviously can't do it as an actual Iron or Starlit Span. But yeah, Arcane Fists is really not bad for Laughing Shadow and Sparkling Targe. I had to keep that in mind to actually mention the hybrid studies that some of these are useful for. So, Spell Parry is for maybe Laughing Shadow only because of you have to have 1 or more hands free. I could argue Twisting Tree can use it as well because they have parry while they're two-handing their staff. If you one-hand your staff, you can have Spell Parry then. So, you infuse magical power into your body or armaments to parry both physical and magical assaults. You raise your guard, gaining a +1 circumstance bonus to AC and saving throws against spells that target you until the start of your next turn, as long as you continue to meet the requirements. So, this is essentially parry. It's the parry ability on weapons, but you add that +1 to your saving throws against spells as well. It's not terrible. It's not necessary, like I said about almost all Magus feats. And it's pretty handy to have for something like a Laughing Shadow. Your third action, though, like the trade-off is, of course, I mentioned action economy with the Magus. You may not be able, depending on how you're spell striking and what you need to be doing, you may not be able to actually do a spell parry. Now, it does set up for a feat later, and I will mention some feat combinations as we go, called Preternatural Parry, which is essentially a parry on reaction. So this may be a second level feat, but you could delay picking up to later if you intend to pick up that other parry-related feat. Okay, Spirit Sheath, Arcane Conjuration Extra Dimensional Magus. You've magically constructed an extra dimensional sheath for your weapon that you access through your clothing, typically through a pocket, sleeve, or seam. This sheath is hard to notice, granting a +2 circumstance bonus to your stealth checks to conceal an item within it. A spirit sheath can hold only 1 weapon at a time, and the weapon must be 1 bulk or less. During a spell strike, you can interact to draw the weapon before you cast the spell. You can draw or return your weapon to the spirit sheath as an interact action as anyone else holding or wearing the clothing, as can anyone else, that is holding or wearing the clothing that contains the sheath. A dispel magic spell or similar effect can be used against the spirit sheath to expel the weapon. The counteract check is made against your spell DC and uses the sheath's counteract level of 1. The weapon is also expelled if you become unconscious. Spirit Sheath is a almost purely roleplay feat. It gives you a little hidden pocket. Put your weapon in it. Rule of Cool says you can draw it during a spell strike. But yeah, ultimately it's something you pick up if you're more going for a flavorful feat at this level. So, 4th level, we have our First round of hybrid study feats. I mentioned them all in the previous part, but we can go into detail with them here. But if you don't care for any of them and you still want a 4th level feat, there are 2 other feats that we have available here as well. So, for an Inexorable Iron, we have Devastating Spell Strike. This changes your Spell Strike a bit so that it does splash damage equal to 2 plus the extra damage from your Arcane Cascade. The damage is the same as your damage in your Spell Strike. Is it good? It's fine. You don't add anything to your Spell Strike action-wise, or there's requirement-wise. You just have to be an Arcane Cascade, and you just get to Spell Strike with it. Free damage is nice, so I'm not going to discount it. I would say this is a middling feat. It's probably worth picking up if you're sticking to just Magus feats and your next roll Iron. It can be handy if you end up getting thrown into a lot of scenarios where you're fighting a lot of weaker mobs to just blam Spell Strike and you get that extra splash damage. And it can be useful for getting adjacent targets because you're probably using a reach weapon, honestly, for an extra Iron. And that's just free damage to anything that's next to the stuff you're hitting, regardless of the distance. So yeah, it's fine. It's a fine feat. So Distracting Spell Strike, you're in Arcane Cascade and you have a hand free. Oh, this is Laughing Shadows. So you weave Distracting Magic with one hand to enhance your Spell Strike. You make a Spell Strike and a feint against the target of your strike. Do this immediately before making the strike, but after choosing the target. The feint gains the Arcane Illusion visual traits, and it always has the basic effects of a feint rather than applying any adjustments or alternative effects from other feats or abilities. So I would probably say I'm not a fan of this one as much. Flavorfully, it's great. It is absolutely spot on for like the cocky, showy Laughing Shadow style. I would say the cocky and showier Laughing Shadow styles. If you're playing a smooth, cool stealth dude, you're probably not going to pick this up. But the problem is, and the reason I say it's probably not a go-to feat, is it's a feint, which is deception, which is charisma-based, which you are not charisma. The Magus is so multiple ability syndromed, disordered, however you want to say it, that you are never going to get charisma in there. You are so focused on getting that strength or dex. And let's face it, you probably want at least 12 dex. Even if you're doing strength, and then you need your int for your spell casting, and then your wisdom for your initiative rolls, and your constitution so you don't die. That, yeah, getting charisma in there is going to be very, very difficult unless you... I mean, if you don't care about getting saving throws built up on your spells, you can drop the int down a little bit, maybe build up your charisma there. But yeah, I would say it's probably more difficult to get that in there to make your feints really good. On flavor point, 100%. Good feat, hit or miss, ironically enough, because it's a feint. So yeah, that's my opinion on this in Distracting Spell Strike. Anyway, next one is for Sparkling Targe. That's Emergency Targe. It's a reaction. An enemy hits you with a melee strike, a melee spell attack roll, or you fail a save against an enemy spell. So this is the reactive shield feat, but with better... That's got better requirement... Wait, how could I say this? It's reactive shield, but better. Because reactive shield's still good if you're using a shield. It's on reaction, you raise your shield. And shield block. Or no, you just raise your shield. You can't get shield block in there, I think. Because it costs another reaction to shield block. But yeah, anyway. Enemy successfully hits you, or you fail that saving throw, you get to raise your shield. Or cast shield. Keep in mind, you can do both. So... this is I have, like 20 AC. I'm hit with a 21. Snap that shield up. I've got 22 AC now. It's really good for helping Sparkling Targes out for their action economy. Because remember, raising a shield requires an action. I actually don't think I mentioned that in Sparkling Targe. That raising a shield or casting shield spends an action. You're a Magus. Your action economy. It's important to keep that in mind. So, when you have that Sparkling Targe, relaxing that action economy is super good. I would say this is one of the few required feats in the Magus class for a hybrid study. I would say if you're Sparkling Targe, you're always going to lock this in at 4. Maybe 6. I could see delaying it a little if you're playing like a Bastion, where you pick up Bastion at 2 and you get reactive shield. You could probably delay it a little bit then. But regardless, Emergency Targe is your go-to level 4 feat with Sparkling Targe. No question, hands down, important feat for that hybrid study. And the fact that it also works against spells, spell attack rolls, really good too. And also, it lets you cast shield. When we get to talking about multi-class things, being able to cast shield when you're multi-class to a psychic, I think it's comically good once per combat. Amping up the enhanced shield that class has is that multi-class can provide you can be very satisfying. On paper, theory crafting so far. Haven't actually got to use it live. In my brain, though, it works amazing. So anyways, Starlight Eyes is the Starlit Span one. So, I'm just going to read this one because it's a feat. So, Starlight shines in your sight, enhancing your perception and range. When you make a ranged strike while in Arcane Cascade, you lower the DC of your flat check to target a creature that's concealed or hidden from you. The DC is reduced to 3 instead of 5 against a concealed creature, and to 9 instead of 11 against a hidden one. When you cast Shooting Star and target a hidden creature, you don't have to attempt the flat check for targeting a hidden creature with a ranged strike. So, Starlight Eyes, it enables you to hit things that are concealed or hidden to you more easily. It's fine. I don't know if it's necessary, though. I think this might be one of those things where if you pick it up, I would probably tell a GM that I'm picking it up. I wouldn't say, hey, can you throw more concealed hidden things at us so I can get use out of this ability? I would just probably mention it and sort of like, to throw a couple things that are going to be a little stealthier, just to leverage it. Because the +2 is big in this game. And that's essentially what it is. So, is it necessary though? No, not at all. I think with Starlit Span, 4th level feat, you could probably skip on it. Might be the weakest of all of these. It's hard to say. I don't want to compare them like that much, but yeah, I don't know that this does like enough. Now, getting Shooting Star to just ignore the hidden component is nice. Yeah, it's very, very situational though. And like I said, if you're dealing with a lot of stealth things, or you pick it up with that intention of like, hey, GM, do a little more stealth things, I want to look cool. Yeah, then its usefulness is fine. But yeah, emergency target ain't. And then we're going to jump to Student of the Staff. This is the other one that I would say is necessary for its hybrid study. So, Student of the Staff, you need to have Arcane Cascade and be a Twisting Tree hybrid study. You've studied the staff extensively to learn the hidden capabilities of your chosen weapon. When you critically succeed at an attack roll using a staff, you apply the critical specialization effect of the club group, which I think is a 5-foot knockback. Or is it a... No, that's polar. I'd have to look it up. While you're in Arcane Cascade stance, your staff gains the Deadly D6 trait, with the damage from the Deadly die being the same damage type as the extra damage from Arcane Cascade. Additionally, you can place property runes into a magic staff you prepare, even though a magic staff can't typically hold property runes. You must first inscribe the property runes into your spellbook using the same process as transferring a rune. The rune takes the form of a specialized diagram in your spellbook occupying 1 page. You can't inscribe runes that can't be placed on a non-magical staff, nor can you inscribe the shifting rune. When you prepare a staff, you can impart any number of property runes from your spellbook into the staff, up to the limit imposed by the staff's weapon potency rune. So, staves can still take on the potency and striking runes, can't put property runes on them. Well, you're a student of the staff. You can put property runes on them, and you can transfer these runes around to your staffs. Like, you got that. What's a 4th level staff? Staff of. I think Abjuration is 6, isn't it? Well, let's say Staff of Evocation is 6. We'll jump ahead a little bit. And you have it +1, and you have another damage dice in there. Like, you can't put a fire. You can't make a +1 flaming, striking Staff of Evocation. Well, you can because you're this Magus. So yeah, that's pretty neat that you can just get those extra damages or effects or whatever in your staves. That's why I would say it's necessary. You can put runes in the staves. Adding Deadly D6 and the crit specialization on there is just icing on the cake for this. And that's why I would say Student of the Staff is necessary for Twisting Tree. You might be able to delay it till 6 if you want, but I would 100% pick this up. It's a really great thing to have for that type of Magus. So, steady spellcasting. All casters get this. It lets you cast a spell and not drop it if you're hit with a attack of opportunity or something. Or other disruption effects. It's a standard caster thing, and if you feel you need it, you can pick it up here. In Striker Scroll, you need Spell Strike. You can attach a scroll to your weapon or hand wrap some mighty blows to blend its spell into an attack, carefully folding it around a part of the weapon or sealing it to the weapon's surface. Attaching a scroll requires using the affix a talisman action. You can only have one scroll affixed to a weapon at any time, and you can't have both a talisman and scroll attached. When you cast a spell from a scroll as part of a spell strike, assuming the spell is one you can normally use with spell strike, you can cast a spell from the scroll as part of a spell strike, assuming it's a spell you can use. You can normally use a spell strike. You can't cast the spell in any other way while it's affixed. Though you can use affix a talisman to remove it again, as normal, but it's gonna be all crumpled up. Put a little humor in there. So this basically lets you take, that scroll of shocking grasp heighten the level 2 and wrap it around your weapon, and then you can spell strike with it. I think you can still spell strike with the scroll you're holding. This just lets you use it through your weapon. Because I think the only caveat for spell strike is it has to be a 1 or 2 action spell. I think if you have a staff in your one hand and you want to spell strike something off the staff, dink, bonk, and you can do it. Same thing with scrolls. This just allows you to be like Sparkling Targe or Inexorable Iron. Something where you don't necessarily have that offhand. Or Laughing Shadow could use it too, honestly. To keep that free hand free. And just slap a scroll on the weapon and go. It's not a bad feat. It's one of those feats that I mentioned that's very utilitarian. Not necessary. Handy if you want to pick it up. So 6th level, we have Attack of Opportunity, which is great. Absolutely great. Creature within your reach uses a manipulate action or a move action, makes a ranged attack, or leaves a square during a move action it's using. And then you just get to pop them with it. And if it's a manipulation action and you crit, you disrupt the action. Strike doesn't count towards your map. Your map doesn't apply to the strike. Standard attack of opportunity. It's what the fighters start with, and you can pick it up at 6th level. Very solid feat. An X roll iron, I think this might be necessary. Because an X roll iron, like I mentioned, you're going to be doing lots of reaching stuff, especially if you enlarge yourself. And this can just make you that tank where no one's getting past you. Or if they try to get past you, you make them pay for it. So very, very solid feat. I'd possibly say Sparkling Targe could use it a lot too. But that's like the most action economy heavy one. So, I mean, I could even see Laughing Shadow picking it up. Because if you're jumping around doing that striker stuff, and you striker behind someone and they try to get away from you, you just pop them. So yeah, very, very good feat to be able to have as a Magus. So, Cascade Countermeasure is a conflux spell. Standard text applies where you get a focus point in the spell. Cascade Countermeasure gives you resistances to damage while you're in Arcane Cascade. We'll go over that spell in detail, but it's a defensive spell. You can get damage resistances. I think it's the same damage as your Arcane Cascade. You might be able to pick it, I don't remember. But we'll go over that when we get to spellcasting proper. And, of course, recharges your spell strike. So, it's fine. Knowledge is power. When you critically succeed at a recall knowledge check about a creature, you gain a +1 circumstance bonus to your next attack roll against the creature, to your AC against its next attack, and to your save against its next effect requiring a save. If you share this information with your allies, they gain the benefits as well. If not used, these bonuses end after 1 minute. So knowledge is power. I would say is good, but not great. You have to crit at a recall knowledge check, which you can do. You can definitely do, especially with Arcana, because you're probably leveling up Arcana. But yeah, if you're not going up against a lot of things that require Arcana, or if you're just not, I mean, if you're leveling up like Occultism or something too, that's fine. But you do have to get that crit. But it is 3 benefits out of it. You get the +1 bonus to your next attack roll against the creature, +1 to AC against its next attack roll, and +1 to any effect requiring a save that it might do. So you do get 3 +1s for 3 different things out of 1 crit on a recall knowledge check. But you got to get that crit in there. So there's that trade-off. Is it good? I think it's good. It's not great. Would I pick it up? Maybe. That depends. If I'm doing a lot of the searching my mind for knowledge thing, yeah, I could see picking it up. Thematically, though, if you're playing like a Magus Investigator, you might actually want to pick it up just to be on theme. So Shielded Tome, you need Raise a Tome. So during your daily preparations, you can magically fuse a shield into your favorite book, where it appears as an elaborate bookmark. While the two are fused, the book shares the hardness, hit points, and broken threshold of the shield. And it can be used with shield block if you have that reaction, with the requirement of you have raised the tome instead of the usual requirements. You can switch the fused item's form from book to shield with a book-shaped motif as a single action, which has the concentrate trait. When the item is in book form, you can read the book and raise the tome. When it's in shield form, you can raise the shield, activate it, and gain any other benefits or effects that the shield normally has, such as a spell guard shield bonus to saving throws against magic. The fusion lasts until your next daily preparations. So, I think this is a very flavorful feat. It is definitely in that category of Spirit Sheath, where this is almost purely for flavor. Because I personally think I would just want the shield. But yeah, if you want to have that, it's perfectly fine to pick up for that reason. Otherwise, I don't know. I still don't like the idea of raising a spell book as a defensive item. So I still wouldn't do it with a spell book. Another book, maybe. But yeah, I think it's definitely a flavor thing more than a mechanical thing. So Capture Magic is a reaction The trigger is you succeed at your save against the foe's harmful spell, or a foe fails its spell attack roll against you from a harmful spell. Just fails, no critical failing, no critically succeeding, just fail, succeed. So when you resist the spell, you capture someone's magic for your own use, and you enter Arcane Cascade with it. So the triggering spell determines the damage. If you're already in Arcane Cascade, though, until your next turn, you gain a +2 status bonus to the damage from your Arcane Cascade. This could be really good. I think I would say this would be really good if you're encountering a lot of magic enemies, and regardless of hybrid study, you have to weave your way through spells. I think the easiest one to succeed at the saves to get the capture magic would, of course, be Sparkling Targe. And probably the one that could utilize the damage bonus the most, probably the Laughing Shadow, because it just adds 2 more damage on. Is this a status bonus? Supposed to take splash damage. Okay, if that's... I think that actually might apply to that splash damage, because it does say bonus to the damage from your Arcane Cascade. And this says 2 plus the extra damage from Arcane Cascade. So that could be a combo right there for Devastating Spell Strike plus Capture Magic. Possibly. That might require GM approval. All around, a solid little feat there. So, Fused Staff. I could say a lot about Fused Staff. Essentially what it is when you prepare your staff in the morning, you can merge it with a weapon. You can switch between the forms as a single action, which has a concentrate trait. When your item's in staff form, you can cast spells from the staff. You get any benefits from the staff itself. And then obviously when you swap to the weapon form, it's a weapon. The staff and the weapon share the fundamental runes. Whichever has the higher potency and striking runes, use those. They don't share any other runes or specific abilities. You can cast spells from the staff as part of a spell strike. Otherwise, in weapon form. Otherwise, you can't cast the spell stabs when it's in weapon form. Fusion lasts until your next daily preparations. Then you can spend 10 minutes to separate them, or to meld the staff into a different weapon. The melding works for you alone. A different wielder can use the staff in its staff form, but can't transform it. Get the benefit of the shared runes, or use its spells for a spell strike in its weapon form. So, Fused Staff, it's not a necessary feat by any stretch of the imagination. It could be, though, a really good feat for mitigating resource issues with the Magus because of its bounded spellcasting. So, whenever you do your daily preparations as a caster, you have the option to prep a staff, and you impart charges into it equal to your highest spell level. You can also burn slots to put more charges on the staff, though with the Magus you don't want to do that. But having charges in that staff could really help you do extra casting each day. So with Fused Staff, this allows things like Inexorable Iron, Laughing Shadow, Sparkling Targe, maybe even Shooting Star, or Starlight Span, and maybe even Twist. I think all 5 can get some benefit out of this. I think Inexorable Iron would probably want this the most if you're going to do it. Because you need to have that 2-hander, right? So you could free action, get that hand out, pull a staff out, interact, pull to draw the staff, cast off the staff. But then what are you going to do? Drop your staff? 1 action to get this back? Spell strike? See, that's the thing. 1 action to put it away, 1 action to regrip. So something like an Inexorable Iron, you could have that staff just in your weapon, ready to go. Same thing with Laughing Shadow. You might have that 1-hander weapon, and you want that free hand the entire time. Well, you don't want to pull out staff, spell strike, get rid of the staff. Also, if you're doing that, you don't get your bonus damage. Sparkling Targe, you have sword and shield going on. I mean, I could see you having just your sword, whatever weapon actually, but your sword, and then you have that free hand, and you pull the staff out, and you're casting with it, and then I'm getting attacked. Oh, I need the +1 to avoid the hit. Emergency charge, cast shield, that sort of thing. Like you could potentially mitigate, that like that, or you could have sword and shield, and your sword is your staff too. So you don't have to juggle weapons / shields. And then, like, Shooting Star probably benefits the least from this because of, like, if you're using a bow, you always have a free hand. And you don't have any free hand requirements. So you can, spell strike with the bow and recharge. Or you can, like, interact, pull a staff out, cast off of it. Next turn, interact, put the staff away, spell strike. Like, there's a lot you can do with the Starlit Span for mitigating your action economy issues. Fuse staff with it, though, it's the same thing with Sparkling Charge, where it's like it just means you don't have to juggle that action to interact to pull staff out. You don't have to worry about dropping it somewhere and losing it. So yeah, like, in Twisting Tree, you might be like, well, what advantage do I get for this? I think Twisting Tree might get the least advantage out of it. Because I was thinking you could do Twisting Tree. You have, like, a big-ass melee weapon. Like a Great Axe or something. And, like, you fuse a staff into it. So you could have something that's like a great sword where you got, like, D12s. Or a halberd with the D10 reach, and then you have a few staff, right? So you can do like big ass swings with big ass damage dice, fuse staff it over to a staff, and you get your Twisting Tree benefits then. Just throwing it out there. You can find ways to make it work with Twisting Tree. I don't think you can do a staff into a staff, even though you consider staves weapons as a Twisting Tree. Because it's also, I think, pointless to do that, because I think you can only, by rules of the game, prepare one staff. So it'd be pointless to do that. Also, actually, no, never mind. I was gonna say there is a dual wielding build you can do that's kind of Gandalf-y with Twisting Tree, but it doesn't work with fuse staff, so that's irrelevant. Actually, maybe it's not. Because if you're dual wielding with two swords, and one of those swords is your staff, that is a dual wielding Magus. That's like the one thing Maguses aren't good with, is dual wielding. There is no dual wield hybrid study by default, though there are third party takes on it. So yeah, and also this is important as an important combo if you want to use this. I do highly recommend Expansive Spell Strike with this, because not every spell on a staff is going to have the attack trait. So you definitely want to consider Expansive Spell Strike to get the most out of that staff in your weapon, because it does have that caveat. You can cast spells from the staff as part of Spell Strike even when the staff is in weapon form. Otherwise, you can't cast the staff spells while it's in weapon form. So you can Expansive Spell Strike those spells, provided they're harmful, and then Burst Cone Line requirements, right? So there is that. Yeah, I think Fuse Staff is like one of the most interesting feats that the Magus has. Also, just to point out, it is only an action to change it back and forth. So even without Expansive Spell Strike, if you're using that, like, Staff of Evocation for a cheapy Shocking Grasp, or if you're, like, you have that next level up one that has Fireball on it, like, enemies running away and you want to ding them with it, spend action to change it to a staff, and then Fireball's 2 actions, bam! Fireball, 500 feet. So it has, some tactical applications too, even without Expansive Spell Strike. It's just Expansive Spell Strike. Like, okay, you couldn't do that actually with Expansive Spell Strike, because you have to attack with it. And actually, I think attacking with a fireball with melee hits you too. But that's why Expansive Spell Strike probably requires its own part to talk about. So yeah, I do really like Fuse Staff. I think it's really cool. It has a lot of uses, but it is one of those, like, you have to think about if you need it, and you have to take considerations into account with it. I still wouldn't say it's necessary, even though we talked about it for like 5 minutes. One-handed spears, though, for what? Sword and boarding? Because you can do one-hand spears. I don't think they have any advantage, though, over other weapons. Yeah, you shall not... Like, that's I think, one of the big things people think of with the staff fighting is Gandalf from the movies. Because he has his sword, and then he has his staff. And he does whack people with that staff quite often. And that is technically a dual-wielding Magus build you could do. Because with Twisting Tree, if you one-hand the staff, it's an agile weapon. So you have less of a negative effect for dual-wielding with it. So you can have, like, maybe, a lighter weapon in your main hand, and then your staff in your offhand. You don't get the benefits as much. I mean, still, you can sheath that weapon or drop it or whatever, and then, two-hand your staff to make it a reach weapon again. So, again, tactical applications of a staff for the mages, especially Twisting Tree mages. All right, so moving on from that, we have Runic Impression, which is another conflux spell. Runic Impression lets you put free property runes into your weapon or unarmed attacks. It recharges your spell strike, and it just gives you that extra rune. I believe the rune choices are restricted to the elemental ones, and then I think Keen becomes available later. There are a couple that become available later as the spell gets heightened. But we'll go over that, like I said, in the actual spell section. So, Spell Swipe. 3 actions. You gotta have a spell strike. It's gotta be charged up. You attack in an arc and enact your spell against everyone you hit. Make a spell strike, but roll separate strikes to attack 2 creatures, each of whom must be within your melee reach and adjacent to each other. If your spell could affect 2 or more targets, your spell affects whichever foes you hit, not just the first target. Otherwise, choose one target to affect with the spell. A spell swipe counts as 2 attacks for your multi-attack penalty, but the penalty doesn't increase until after you make both attacks. If you're using a weapon that has the sweep trait, its circumstance bonus applies against both targets. You can use this activity only with melee strikes, even if you have the Starlit Span Hybrid Study or similar ability. If you use Expansive Spell Strike to spell strike with an area spell, apply the area as described in Expansive Spell Strike, choosing one of the creatures you strike to determine the area and whether the spell fails due to a critically failed strike. If you use Expansive Spell Strike to spell strike with a targeted spell, the spell is lost completely only if both strikes are critical failures. All right, so Spell Swipe is Whirlwind Spell. Kinda. There is a Whirlwind Spell Strike at 20. So it's not Whirlwind Spell. It's Cleave Spell, right? Cleave Spell Strike for 3 actions. Pretty good, actually. Again, not necessary, though. We're playing the mages. Nothing we're doing is really that necessary. So, Spell Swipe, really good for Inexorable Iron. Pretty good for everyone else. Inexorable Iron would probably get the most out of it, especially if you're enlarged with a reach weapon, as I've mentioned before several times. But I'm going to mention here a special thing you can do with the Psychic. So if you multi-class the Psychic, at 6th level, you can get the Imaginary Weapon Cantrip. And if you amp Imaginary Weapon, it can hit 2 targets. Now, by default, Imaginary Weapon with a Spell Strike can't hit 2 targets even when amped up. It just does absurd amounts of damage to 1 target. With Spell Swipe, though, Imaginary Weapon can hit those 2 targets. So, with the Psychic multi-class, Spell Swipe becomes kinda nasty with the Imaginary Weapon Cantrip. Little special combo there that we're going to talk about again when we talk about multi-classing. But, yeah, man, like, Ooh, that just sounds fun to spell swipe that cantrip against things. I don't think there's much else to talk about. It's not necessary, of course, but it is pretty good for hitting multiple targets with a spell. I think though the problem is more that like you need to figure out which spell can do that. And off the top of my head, without expansive spell strike, it's like imaginary weapon, scorching ray. That might be it. Yeah, kind of hard to figure out a spell that can hit two things in there. You do get the two strikes, and then you get to choose which one goes with the spell strike. I mean, you can, I think, option select here. Yeah, I think you get to choose the targets. It's cool, Pikachu-san. Why am I getting a text? Who's texting me? That's just rude. Oh. No, yeah, that's a proper text. Never mind. Yep. That is spell swipe. And I think standby spell, the next feat's great. It doesn't sound like it does anything super sexy, but man, can it be helpful. So, you've honed one spell as your favorite combat technique, and you've practiced it enough that you no longer need to prepare it to cast it. Choose a spell in your spellbook that you could use with Spell Strike, and that has a level no higher than the highest level Magus spell slot you have. You can cast this spell without having to prepare it ahead of time by expending a spell slot of a sufficient level to cast your chosen spell. You can change this spell whenever you add new spells to your spellbook or by studying your spellbook for an hour. Now, that on paper, that's like, it sounds kind of boring. But when you realize you have 4 whole slots plus your 2 studio slots for a grand total of 6 slots, having effectively a 7th option can be really handy, especially if it's something like, we're just going to throw this out there, of course, Shocking Grasp. Shocking Grasp is the Magus' bread and butter spell. It's D12s that you put in your weapon and electrocute with your weapon attack, right? So, Shocking Grasp, used by all Maguses everywhere. Standby spell would let you not have to prepare that Shocking Grasp. Instead, you can prepare like 4 utility spells. You can prepare a variety of spells with different damage types. If you're expansive spell striking, you can put in all sorts of other damaging spells you could use with that with your spell strike. But you will always have Shocking Grasp available, because you can just burn a spell slot, slap Shocking Grasp into it, and go. It is a very handy tactical feat to pick up. I would even recommend it as the feat to pick up at 8 if you don't care about Fuse Staff, because it can be incredibly handy in the long run for you to just have your sidearm spell ready to go at all times, and then you're just like, also I have 2 preps of haste and a prep of disintegrate and magnetic acceleration. Oh, that thing's electro weak. Actually, I don't know what's electric constructs. You're like, got him. Or if you're like, oh, I got, Burning Hands and Fireball, but we're going up against a fire elemental, whatever. Something like that, where it's like, oh, I can option select my Shocking Grasps back in. So yeah, it's very handy. A very handy feat to have. Does it do anything crazy? No. But sometimes mundane is very good. And I would put this in that category. Welcome back, Pikachu-san. All right, so level 10. This is where we get another set of hybrid study related things, and I'm gonna go in order of the hybrid studies as I have before. So, Inexorable Iron has Sustaining Steel. This is a free action. you need to have Arcane Cascade and be part of the hybrid study. The trigger is you cast a spell using a spell slot, and you're in the Arcane Cascade stance. Now, I mentioned in part 1 that there's going to be a little asterisk next to cast a spell versus spell strike. This is it. This trigger very specifically says you cast a spell using a spell slot. It doesn't say you cast a spell or use spell strike with spell from a spell slot. I don't know why you wouldn't have it be part of a spell strike to do this. So I think here they just forgot to put that little bit in. I would still say Sustaining Steel counts if you use a spell from a spell slot with a spell strike. Because honestly, otherwise, it's a very poorly written feat. So what it does is you pour your magic into your weapon using a substance to transform the magic into restorative energy. Oh, it even says you pull magic from your weapon anyways. So yeah, you can spell strike with it. They probably just didn't put spell strike in there because it would probably add too many words in. But yeah, you regain hit points equal to double the spell's level and roll to end any persistent negative damage you have. If the spell is a necromancy spell, any persistent negative damage automatically ends, and you can change the type of arcane of damage in your Arcane Cascade to positive if you wish. So you can affect undead and other creatures with negative healing. So Sustaining Steel is really good, especially if you've multi-classed to another class that has spell slots, giving you more spell slots. Free is good. I always like things that give you free effects for basically no actions and no investment on your side. So being an Arcane Cascade, you're probably always an Arcane Cascade. And an Extra Iron, you cast Enlarge on yourself, right? And you just regain those, 12 hit points at this point. 10 or 12 hit points for free. Very handy to have with that particular hybrid study. And I would say this kind of is where an Extra Iron, like I said, it was probably the weakest out of the 5 initially. I would say this is where it catches up to everyone else and actually gets really good. Because this helps you sustain. It's called Sustaining Steel. This will help you not die and do your job as a frontline fighter. I do really like Sustaining Steel. And there are actually some multi-class combos you can do that get you a lot of native healing that you can just roll Sustaining Steel in. And your temporary hit points you're always going to have with an Next Level Iron. And you're very hard to take down at that point. So yeah, I definitely recommend Sustaining Steel at 10. I would probably say it's the Inexorable Iron requirement spell, or feat, like how Emergency Charge is required at 4 for Sparkling Charge. I would possibly say this is required for Inexorable Iron IMHO. But yeah, very solid. So for Laughing Shadow, we have Dimensional Disappearance. You need the Dimensional Assault focus spell, and you have to be part of the hybrid study. So you take advantage of teleportation to better hide your position. When you cast Dimensional Assault, you're affected by an invisibility spell at the end of the teleport. You can choose not to make the strike that is normally part of Dimensional Assault. If you do make the strike, your invisibility ends after the strike as normal for invisibility. This is what we call tactical advantage. So you get a really handy trick here where you can Dimensional Assault at someone, land, and not hit them, and you're gone. You can move, you can strike, you're invisible. You get a bonus to strike, I think. So you just get options out of this. And I do really like free spellcasting when you do other things. So free spellcasting invisibility as part of Dimensional Assault, which also moves you up to half your speed, lets you make a strike, recharge a spell strike, throw in the fourth thing of I'm invisible now. So you get one action doing 4 things, and they're all good things. So, well, 3 to 4 things because you can opt not to strike. But yeah, I really do like Dimensional Disappearance. I wouldn't say it's required. I don't think you need to require it. Like, you need it 100% as Laughing Shadow. Is it really good? It's very good. Sparkling Targe has Dazzling Block. So you have to be an Arcane Cascade to use this. Obviously, you need Sparkling Targe Hybrid Study and Arcane Cascade. So when you use Shield Block, you create a flash of brilliant multicolored light in a 15-foot cone. Each creature in the area must attempt a Fortitude save with the following effects. If they critically succeed, they're unaffected. If they succeed, they are dazzled for 1 round. If they fail, they're blinded for 1 round and dazzled for a minute. The creature can spend an interact action to rub its eyes to end the blinding condition. If they critically fail, they're blinded for a round, can't counteract it, and they're dazzled for an hour. Again, really good ability here, where you do that shield block, you just do that, reflective cone that hits, 15 feet. So 1, and then 3, and then 5. And you can potentially blind a group of enemies. It's a very solid feat. Not required. It's probably on that level of Dimensional Disappearance where it's like, this is a great tactical option. It will affect allies because it says each creature. But yeah, you do a shield block, you mitigate a lot, potentially, of a incoming pain. And even if you only get the dazzled, that's still dazzled. It's like, it's still a penalty that the enemy has to, or creatures have to deal with. But yeah, I think it's a really, really good feat for mitigating effects with Sparkling Targe. So Starlit Span gets Meteoric Spell Strike. So you're wielding a ranged weapon or thrown weapon, or you have a ranged unarmed attack. Those are requirements. So a trail of energy flows from your target back to you. Make a spell strike with a ranged weapon or a ranged unarmed attack against a target within the ranged weapon or unarmed attack's first range increment. The spell you cast for the spell strike can't be a cantrip or a focus spell. Each creature in a line between you and the target, excluding you and the target takes damage equal to double the spell's level. Determine the damage type as described in Arcane Cascade. So, you want your spells to be a railgun now? Here it is. It's not a lot of damage. It's at this point is it 8 or 10? Or is it 10 or 12? It's still damage though, and it's in a line. That could be up to 60 feet long, by the way, with a bow. Yeah, it's a solid feat. It's not required, but it is solid and it is cool. Like, honestly, just, firing that bow and go thunk, and then you have like that line of fire back to you. Really cool. It's just cool. It's a really neat feat. Again, it's free damage on your spell strikes. You can option it because it's a spell strike. You can do your normal one. If your allies are in the middle of, like, between you and the enemy, you don't want to hurt them with this. Yeah, it's really good. And really straightforward. It's just damage. So lunging spell strike. Twisting tree requirement, you're wielding a staff. I'm already chuckling over this. So your spell unwinds the structure of your staff to make it exceptionally long, or even separate into shards held together by magical power. Make a spell strike with a staff, with a spell that isn't a cantrip or focus spell. Increase the staff's reach by 5 feet times the spell's level. You get, 25 feet on this right here? 25-foot reach on a spell strike that's not a ranged attack? Yeah, that's really fun and good. I would probably say Twisting Tree is the only hybrid study where it's like both of these are required. Not because they're not overtly broken and they're not like an overt numerical advantage. They're just really solidly utilitarianly good. I think they're both just good. Like, yeah, and this is every spell strike, like every spell strike off of a spell that uses a slot. So it's like every one of those shocking grasps is now 25 foot in range. Now, of course, there is, Starlit Span that goes as far as like the weapon range increment of a weapon. But remember, you have all of the advantage of the Twisting Tree hybrid study on top of now having this super range. So yeah, very good. I love Lunging Spell Strike. I think it's like the most appealing thing of Twisting Tree, because Twisting Tree is not what I would call a first choice for hybrid study, but I think this kind of makes it really solidly good. So Cascading Ray is one of our two options for not hybrid study related things. So for a single action, your last action had to be a successful spell strike, and the spell you cast dealt energy damage. So acid, cold, electricity, fire force, negative, positive, or sonic. The energy spills out to extend beyond the creature you struck. The flowing energy forms a ray with a range of 60 feet from the creature you damaged. You can't target any creatures you damaged with your spell strike with the ray. Make a spell attack roll against the new target's AC at the same multi-attack penalty as the strike. On hit, the target of the ray takes 1d4 damage per spell level of the same type of energy that the spell deals that you double on crit. If you cast the spell in your spell strike from a spell slot, the damage from Cascading Ray increases to 1d8 damage per level. If the spell deals more than one damage type, you choose the damage for the ray. This ray has the attack trait and the School and Tradition traits of the original spell, and the trait matching the damage type. So, basically, spell strike, spend that action, ray shoots out 60 feet, deals more damage. It can potentially be a good chunk of damage because it's, at this point, like 5d4, 5d8, something like that, right? And I have to make sure I'm saying that right just real quick. Because it's half your level, right? Ish. Yeah, I'm saying that right. So yeah, you can get like 4 or 5d8 going here with your slots. D4s with your cantrips. Again, it isn't what I would call free damage. This is not like the Meteoric Spell Strike. This is more damage, potentially. But it is requiring that action. And I don't remember if this problem was solved officially, but the requirement reading makes it almost sound like you don't need to do this on the same turn. So you could, like, move up, spell strike. Oh, I successfully hit a spell strike. Well, next turn, do you get your Cascading Ray? I don't think you do. I think the intention of this feat was you spell strike. I have that third action. Okay, I'm not going to recharge my spell strike, which is probably the better option, or move or anything like that. I'm going to use my third action to Cascading Ray something else. Now, the Ray does do a spell attack roll, so you're -2 at this point already. And potentially because your spell attack roll scales off int, you might not have high int, so it might be equal to your normal attack roll. Might be a point or two less. It has good range. Damage typing is fine. But it's like, it costs an action. I know if it was like free, it would be overtly good. It would be the spell, it would be the feat to pick. But yeah, I think it's fine. But it is also just damage, no extra effects. And I would rule it as you have to do it that same turn. So you might not always get to use it. So, gotta do trade-offs. Advantage, though, for Starlit Span, if you're, like, you could do your Meteoric Spell Strike. Oh, hey, you landed a Spell Strike, Cascading Ray. Just linking up lasers, I guess. But yeah, it's fine. It's damage, though. That's all it is damage. Like, and again, if you want a Meteoric Spell Strike, you're getting this at 12, and there's probably better feats to pick up. So, yeah, Cascading Ray, Yeah. 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 Rapid recharge, free action once per day. You can recharge your spell strike as a free action. Whatever. Yeah, that's honestly a whatever to me. It could be good, but it just compared to everything else, it's like it's just rapid recharge is just so. If you could do it more than once per day, like it was int times per day, it'd be really good. Probably brokenly good. But no, I'm like, if it was once per day and then at, 15, you can use this twice per day, or 20, you can use this twice per day, I'd probably say it's more worth it. But yeah, just once per day, nah, man. I don't know that I'd pick it. Okay, 12th level feats. We have Conflux Focus, which is if you spent 2 focus points, when you refocus, you get 2 back. This is either complete trash or the most amazing feat ever, depending on your character's build. If you have multiple focus points and you use them a lot, one of the best feats you could ever pick up. If you're not using focus points at all, or you only have the 1 focus point, you don't bother with it. So it's on either end of the value spectrum. Magic Sense. You have a literal 6th sense for ambient magic in your vicinity. You can sense the presence of magic auras as though you were always using a 1st level detect magic spell. This detects magic in your field of vision only. When you seek, you gain the benefits of a 3rd level detect magic spell on things you see. In addition to normal benefits from seeking, you can turn this sense off and on as a free action at the start or end of your turn. I don't know. I don't know. If this were an 8th level or 6th level feat, I'd maybe say it's fine. But it's like, if you're an elf, you get this at freaking 1st level. It's just I don't know if I would want to pick this at 12th level. Just always have a cantrip up. I don't know. Since I am recommending certain things, I just don't recommend that one, honestly. Unless you're doing it for flavor purposes, maybe. Maybe you have to deal with this a lot in a campaign where you just constantly detect magic up. Otherwise, yeah, I think the other 2 feats are better here. And 12 can actually be used, like I said, if you're doing like Meteoric Spell Strike and you want Cascading Ray, you can pick up Cascading Ray at 12. It's like this is or vice versa. Like this is a kind of level to do that. This is also the level where like expert spellcasting exists when you're multi-classing. This is where expert alchemy or master alchemy exists if you multi-class to alchemist. Magic Sense just doesn't compare to that stuff to me. Anyways, yeah, 3rd feat here is Overwhelming Spell Strike. So this is a variant spell strike for you where the spell you cast as part of your spell strike ignores an amount of the target's resistant to acid, cold, electricity, fire, or sonic damage equal to your level. This applies to all damage the spell deals, including persistent damage and damage caused by an effect of the spell. A creature's immunities aren't affected. So, standardly fine. Overcoming resistances for extra damage is nice. With the Thaumaturge out now, Overwhelming Spell Strike, you can kind of take advantage of it more because you'll know which things have the resistances and what to use against them. Is it necessary? Nah. Is it good? Yeah, it's good. Is it great? It's good. Okay, so, speaking of great, this might be the best feat in the class, and one of the best feats in the entire game. Arcane Shroud. So, you need to have Arcane Cascade and Spell Strike. You can do this once per turn. Your requirements are, your most recent action was to cast a spell from a spell slot or make a spell strike from a spell slot. Again, this is that wording that I think should have been on Sustaining Steel, but wasn't. And that's why Sustaining Steel kind of confused me in my head. I think I'm past it. We're past that one. We're talking about Arcane Shroud here. So, your spell has a powerful after effect, briefly granting you a certain spell depending on the spell you cast. You use Arcane Cascade. So you get all your benefits of Arcane Cascade, and are subject to an additional after effect spell depending on the school of your most recent spell. This after effects spell's duration lasts until the end of your next turn, or its normal duration, whichever is longer. You use using Arcane Shroud again ends the existing spell you gained from Arcane Shroud, as you would expect. So, if you cast an Abjuration spell and enter Arcane Cascade, you get Stone Skin for free. You do a Conjuration spell, you get Blink for free. You do a Divination spell, you get See Invisible. You do an Enchantment spell, you're affected by Heroism for free. Evocation, Fire Shield for free. Illusion, Invisibility for free. Necromancy, False Life for free. Transmutation, Fleet Step for free. You get free spells for casting spells. And they're all really good. And also see Invisibility. No, I'm just joking. That one actually is really handy to have if you need it. By the way, I was going to say Time Sense, but it can't be a cantrip. So, yeah, like, Arcane Shroud, like, just out of the gate, Transmutation, cast Jump, you get Fleet Step for free. Like, just a quickie little combo there. You can do the jump, and then suddenly you can move, like, 30 feet more? You cast an enchantment on yourself to give yourself a buff. Oh, I also get Heroism. Oh, I'm casting Abjuration, like warding aggression. I think it's Abjuration, correct? I now have Stone Skin for free. It's amazing. Arcane Shroud is amazing. It is the one feat that I will say is 100% required for every Magus. It is absurdly good. It is the epitome of what I said earlier about getting free stuff is good. This is getting free stuff that's bonkers banana crazy good. Because you get the full duration of them too. So you get that full duration Stone Skin for free off of casting an Abjuration spell. Good. It's good. It's very, very good. I can't emphasize enough how good this ability is. Heroism's in there too. Like, damn. Heroism for free. Yeah, and it kind of makes the other two spells at 14, or feats at 14, seem kind of... Because Hasted Assault is a conflict spell where you get to haste yourself for a focus point. But you can only use it to strike. I don't know if it lets you spell strike with the free action. So yeah, it's kind of a weird haste. I mean, it does recharge your spell strike. I would actually say if you don't have anything you want to pick up at 16 or 18, that's where you can pick up Hasted Assault. Because Arcane Shroud is at the same level as this. So it's like, I don't think I'd pass up Arcane Shroud to get a haste in there, which you can cast from a spell slot and also get the benefits from Arcane Shroud off of casting haste on yourself. And then there's also Preternatural Parry, which I mentioned earlier. When you have Spell Strike, when you have Spell Parry, and the trigger is you're targeted by a strike or a spell attack roll, or you're about to do a saving throw against a spell effect, you have to have that one or more hands free still. You snap your weapon or limb into place to ward off the harm at the last second. You get a +2 circumstance bonus to AC and saving throws against the triggering effect until the start of your next turn. Yeah, it's a super parry. You basically get a shield for free. It's shield block without a shield. It's a preternatural parry. You can parry a strike or a spell. It's actually pretty good. But again, Arcane Shroud, man. Preternatural Parry would definitely be a 16 pickup for me. If I really, really wanted it. Because again, you can just... Yeah, it's borderline saying to me... Now, this is me personally saying this. That Hasted Assault and Preternatural Parry are actually 16th level feats instead of 14th level feats. That's how I view Arcane Shroud. I can't stop talking about it too. It's so good. Like, the only thing that keeps it from being like the totally most busted thing ever is you get it at 14 and not like earlier. It'd be way too good earlier. It's already like, whoa, look out good. But yeah. We're almost done with feats here. Man, we're going almost over an hour on them too. So, Dispelling Spell Strike, 3 actions. So you make a spell strike. If it hits, you can also attempt to counteract a single spell of your choice on the target. The counteract level is half your level rounded up, and the counteract check modifier is a standard modifier for counteracting with a spell. Your intelligence plus your spellcasting proficiency bonus plus any bonuses or penalties that specifically apply to counteract checks. You get to dispel on a spell strike. It's very good. This is, by the way, technically unlimited dispels, and you don't need to do this on spell slot spells. So if you come up upon like a door that has some sort of high level spell protection, you can just sit there whacking the door with like a dagger or punching it and spell striking with a punch, and you'll just keep dispelling that spell. Like out of combat, it's essentially unlimited dispels. But yeah, it's a 3 action ability, so it's kind of restricted on when you can do it, because you have to be already near or like already have the target in range. It's a free dispel though, so like if you do get it, you get it. Also, Starlit Span, this I think turns into almost your default spell strike for anything you're dealing with that has like magic effects on it, because you can just do this with your attack. Like against magical foes, you're a mage killer with this, with the Starlit Span. The other maguses, I would probably say Sparkling Targe is going to have the hardest time with this, because even at 16, you're probably still thinking about raising your shield as an action. So you maybe don't have the 3 actions available all the time to play your character as safely as possible. Probably the other super easy to use one is an actual Iron, because you'll probably have reach. But yeah, I think Starlit Span gets the most out of this. Borderline defaulting it based on what you're dealing with. I mean, of course, you don't recharge your spell strike that turn, so you do have to pick and choose when you use it, but still, it's really, really good for Starlit Span. So Resounding Cascade is the other 16th level feat. You have to have Arcane Cascade and be an Arcane Cascade, or use Arcane Cascade. So when you enter Arcane Cascade, you disperse the magical reinforcement to nearby allies. You grant the extra damage of Arcane Cascade in an aura affecting all allies in a 5-foot emanation. This uses only the base damage of the stance based on the ally's weapon specialization. It doesn't get any bonuses from it, like with the Laughing Shadow hybrid. As for normal for duplicate effects, multiple Arcane Cascades don't stack. So, free action, give your allies free damage if they're your battle buddies. Not terrible. If you don't feel like you're going to need Dispelling Spell Strike, if you don't feel you could work it into a character and you have an open 16th level or 18th level feat, yeah, it's just free damage for your team, which is always nice. Is it a status bonus? No, I think it's just extra damage. I don't think it's typed, from what I recall. 18th level, Conflux Wellspring. Like Conflux Focus before it, if you have focus points and you're built around focus points, it's the best feat at this level. If you're not using focus points, don't care about focus spells as much, it's trash tier. So again, it's on both sides of the usefulness spectrum for you. The other option at 18 is Versatile Spell Strike. Prerequisites are Spell Strike. So you can channel an entire realm of possibilities of your spellbook into one attack. Once during your daily preparations, you can use a spell slot to hold that infinite potential, rather than using it to prepare a spell. When you make a spell strike, you can expend this special spell slot to immediately prepare and cast a spell from your spellbook at 2 levels lower than that spell slot. As normal for preparing spells, you can use a spell of an even lower level, heightening it accordingly. You don't have any spell prepared in that slot until you cast it with that slot. I would love this feat if it didn't have that 2 levels or lower restriction. This is kind of like the supposed to be, in my mind, the big boy version of Standby Spell, where Standby Spell is I can turn any of these slots into the spell. This is supposed to be I can have this slot be any of these spells. So I would love it if it didn't have that restriction on it. You're at 18th level. It could have just been a free spell slot, right? It could have just been that spell slot that's just open for any of your spells you can spell strike with. I mean, it does jump up significantly in usefulness when you have expansive spell strike. But yeah, I don't think it's that great. Is it good? I think it's good, but it's not great because of that level reduction part. Which is a shame, because it could have been a really helpful thing to pick up at 18, because at 19 you get double spell strike, so you could have potentially one slot just give you whatever you need, and then you can double up on it. So yeah, I think it's good, don't get me wrong, but it's not like, oh my god, I want that. There's could have been on that, where it could have been that. Anyways, the 20th level capstones. You have Supreme Spell Strike. You are quickened. You can use this action to strike or recharge your spell strike. Finally, the pain is alleviated. Yeah, you basically get that free action to recharge your spell strike. Yeah, you can use it for a strike. I don't know if you can use it for a spell strike, but yeah, it's really just standardly good to be quickened like that for the free strike and recharging your spell strike. Or you get Whirlwind Spell. 3 actions. You need your spell strike and it needs to be charged. You combine the might of a multi-target spell with a whirling flurry of attacks. You use Spell Strike, making a melee strike against each enemy within your reach instead of against one enemy. If your spell can affect multiple targets, your spell affects all foes you hit, not just the first target, up to the spell's normal maximum targets. If you strike more foes than the spell could target, choose which foes are affected by the spell. Each attack counts towards your multi-attack penalty, but doesn't increase your penalty until you've made all your attacks. If you use Expansive Spell Strike to spell strike with an area spell, apply the area as described in Expansive Spell Strike, choosing one of the creatures you strike to determine the area and whether the spell fails due to a critically failed strike. If you use Expansive Spell Strike to spell strike with a targeted spell, each creature you critically fail to strike is unaffected by the spell, but the spell isn't completely lost from a single critical failure. This is going to be painful to read. You can use this activity only with melee strikes, even if you have the Starlit Span Hybrid Study or a similar ability. Rip level 20 Whirlwind spell that's 60 feet wide. Anyways, yeah, so Starlit Span, enjoy your Supreme Spell Strike. Whirlwind spell. Inexorable Iron, enjoy your Whirlwind spell. So it's like, yeah, it's 3 actions. You do a whirlwind attack, so you hit everything in your weapon range, and then if you have a multi-hitting spell, you pop everything with the spell. Yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's Death Blossom with magic. Very potent, very damaging, more circumstantial than Supreme Spell Strike. Like I said, I think this is probably the capstone for Inexorable Iron, especially the way I've been describing it so far, where you have a reach weapon and you're enlarged, so you have that big area of effect, and you're just like, with like, I don't know, Scorching Ray or some other multi-target thing with your spell strike. Even if you're not doing that, you still get a whirlwind effect out of it, so you're still damaging everything in the area. So yep, another solidly good capstone. If you feel your character can take full advantage of it. But yeah, Supreme Spell Strike is probably the way to go at 20. So we did it. That's Feats. All of them. Yeah, the Magus' Feats, they are perfectly fine. Not that many required. There are a lot of interesting things in there. As I mentioned, the few staff we talked about extensively, probably the most interesting from a strategic level. very few are required, and the only ones that are super required are based off the hybrid study. I would say Sparkling Targe, you definitely want Emergency Targe. Twisting Tree, you probably want your Student of the Staff and Lunging Spell Strike. But like Laughing Shadow, Dimensional Disappearance is good. Don't need it 100%. Starlight Expand, Meteoric Spell Strike's good. Don't need it 100%. Sustaining Steel would definitely be required. I think personally required for an Extra Iron. And then the only feat I would say pick this up and enjoy it and love it and never let it go is Arcane Shroud. If I were doing this as a text guide, we do that Treant Monk color coding thing, and it's like, if it's purple, it's the best ever, and it's purple. Arcane Shroud is purple, 100%. Otherwise, the Magus, when it comes to their feat layouts, very open. Like I said, it's a very pliable class for multi-classing, and we'll get to that definitely. But yeah, that's the feats. So I think that'll be this part. Next part will be spells. And I don't know how I want to do this. Next part, we will definitely go over the conflux spells. And I think I'm going to make a spell list, because there's a core rulebook, the Advanced Player's Guide, Secrets of Magic, and Dark Archive all have spells in it that are all useful. So I could either load up this window with just tabs and jump back and forth, or I could just, I could possibly just load up Archives of Nethys and scroll through that. Because spellcasting, like, there are spells that are very good for the mages, like Gouging Claw, the cantrip. Shocking Grasp, the level 1 spell that every magus, uses. That's been the sidearm for the magus for its entire existence, even going back to like the Duskblade. But there's also like True Strike, which is very good for the mages. And then there's like utility, like Jump and Fly and Haste. But like, if I wanted to say like, oh, think of the cantrip Time Sense and Arcane Cascade, like I'd have to go to Dark Archive and get Time Sense and talk about time, like. And then there are things where it's like Expansive Spell Strike completely changes the list. So I don't know exactly how I'm going to handle spellcasting. Whether I want to make a list and then go, or if I want to maybe break it apart so I can just do conflict spells for the next part and then make subparts for, attack spells and then Expansive Spell Strike spells. So yeah. And, there's a whole other section which would be like, do you put damage spells in your slots or utility spells in your slots and use your cantrips for damage? That's a whole thing of talking about that I could do for that. So spells are going to be next, and it's going to be way more complicated than what things have been so far. So yeah, that's going to be part 2, and part 3 will be the spell casting.